My husband begged to go to the hospital for his ex, my stepsister. I still love her, he said. I took him. He ran to her without looking back. That night I left. He found the empty house and a note, "Now she can have you." Now he's begging me to come back. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My husband, Arthur, started to cry. Now, I'm not talking about a few dignified tears, the kind that well up in a man's eyes during a sad movie. No, this was something else entirely. These were deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire 6-foot frame, raw and ugly sounds of pure panic tearing from his throat. He begged me, his hands gripping the dashboard of our sensible sedan, his knuckles white. He pleaded with me to drive faster, to get him to the hospital. His ex-girlfriend, who also happens to be my stepsister, Brenda, had been in a terrible car accident. "Please, Jude," he choked out, his face pale and slick with a mixture of sweat and tears in the dim glow of the streetlights. "Please, just get me there. I need to be there. I still love her." I just sat there. The engine hummed, the windshield wipers swished back and forth against a light drizzle, but inside my head, there was a profound, deafening silence. The world outside, the quiet suburban street we'd lived on for 5 years, just faded into a dull, gray blur. The only thing that felt real was that sentence, hanging in the air between us like a thick, suffocating smoke. I still love her. I should have screamed. I should have pulled the car over and thrown him out onto the wet asphalt. I should have unleashed the hurricane of rage and betrayal that was suddenly brewing in my chest. But I didn't. I did nothing. I stayed silent. I just put the car in drive and took him. At the emergency room entrance, under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights, he scrambled out of the car before it had even come to a complete stop. He ran, a frantic, desperate sprint toward the automatic sliding glass doors, and he never once looked back. That night, while he was sitting by her bedside, I packed my bags. When he finally came home hours later to our dark, empty house, all he found was a note on my pillow. It said, "Now she can have you." And now? Now he's blowing up my phone with dozens of calls a day, leaving rambling, desperate voicemails. He's texting me novel-length apologies, telling me he didn't mean it, that he was in shock, begging me to please come back. But to understand the end, you have to understand the beginning. You need to understand how perfect it all seemed, how safe I felt, before you can truly appreciate the spectacular, devastating way it all came crashing down. My name is Judith, but everyone who loves me calls me Jude. I met Arthur a little over 5 years ago. I was 49, he was 51. I was at a 4th of July barbecue at a mutual friend's house, feeling a little out of place. I'd been divorced for the better part of a decade and was perfectly content with my life. My career was stable, I had a great circle of friends, and I had my routines. I wasn't looking for love, in fact, I was actively avoiding it. But there he was, standing by the grill, a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other, arguing playfully with our host about the optimal number of times to flip a burger. He had this laugh, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to crinkle the corners of his kind blue eyes, and it made you want to laugh right along with him. He must have noticed me standing alone, because he ambled over with 2 plates piled high with food. "You look like you could use a burger that's been flipped a controversial 7 times, he said with a grin. He then proceeded to tell me a terrible, rambling joke about his world-famous potato salad. It wasn't the joke that got me, it was the way his eyes danced while he told it. It was the way he listened when I talked, really listened, with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in that crowded backyard. We talked for hours that night, long after the fireworks had faded and most of the other guests had gone home. We sat on the cool grass and talked about everything, our failed first marriages, our favorite old movies, our shared belief that cilantro tastes like soap. It was easy. It was comfortable. It felt less like a first meeting and more like picking up a conversation with an old friend. By the time I left, he had my number, and I had this dangerous little flutter of hope in my chest, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Our relationship moved quickly after that, but it never felt rushed. It felt inevitable. We had this incredible chemistry that went beyond just physical attraction. We finished each other's sentences. We shared the same quirky, sometimes dark, sense of humor. Within 6 months, we had moved in together, blending my collection of antique books with his modern furniture, a process that should have been stressful but instead felt like a joyful, collaborative project. We were building a life. Early on, he told me about Brenda. We were big believers in transparency, in putting all the cards on the table. He told me they had been college sweethearts, one of those epic, all-consuming, 7-year relationships that everyone, including them, thought would end in marriage. So what happened? I asked one evening, curled up on the sofa next to him. He sighed, staring off at a fixed point on the wall. Honestly? We were just kids. We wanted different things. I wanted to settle down, maybe start a family. She wanted to build her career, see the world. It just ran its course, he said with a final-sounding shrug. We grew up and grew apart. It was sad, but it was for the best. It was over 20 years ago, Jude. He didn't talk about her much after that, which I took as a healthy sign. There were no old photos tucked away in shoeboxes, no nostalgic stories that made me feel like I was being compared to a ghost. When her name did come up in conversation with old mutual friends, he spoke of her neutrally, the way you'd talk about an old coworker you wished well but had no real emotional ties to. I never once worried that she was the one that got away. I was confident in what we had. I was his present, his future. She was just a closed chapter in a book from long ago. And then, about a year into our relationship, life threw us the kind of curveball you only see in bad soap operas. My father, a widower for nearly a decade, announced that he was getting remarried. He was giddy with happiness, and I was thrilled for him. His bride-to-be was a lovely woman named Carol, a kind-hearted widow he'd met on a seniors' cruise. And Carol had a daughter. A successful lawyer, recently divorced herself. Her daughter's name, of course, was Brenda. Yes, that Brenda. The world can be an incredibly small, and sometimes profoundly cruel, place. The shock was palpable. Arthur and I just stared at each other for a full minute when my dad told us. Later that night, we sat down at our kitchen table and had a long, serious talk about it. He took both of my hands in his expression earnest. Jude, listen to me, he said, his voice firm. This is ancient history. That chapter of my life closed over 2 decades ago. You are the woman I love. You are my future. This doesn't change anything between us. It's just a bizarre, awkward coincidence. We're adults. We can handle this. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? So we handled it. We put on our best faces and decided to make it work. At the wedding, a lovely affair at a local vineyard, Arthur was the picture of polite cordiality. He shook Brenda's hand, asked about her law firm, and kept a respectful distance. Brenda, for her part, was friendly and warm to me. She told me how happy she was for our parents and complimented my dress. We all acted like mature, well-adjusted adults. We were family now, after all, and we were going to make the best of this strange new reality. 2 years into our relationship, Arthur proposed to me on a trip to the coast, writing "Marry me, Jude" in the sand. We got married in a simple, beautiful ceremony in our own backyard, surrounded by a small group of our closest friends and family. My dad and Carol were there, beaming. Brenda was there, too, smiling and applauding along with everyone else. Our lives settled into a beautiful, comfortable rhythm. We had a good marriage, a solid partnership built on what I thought was unshakable trust and mutual respect. I honestly felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Looking back now, I can see I wasn't lucky. I was just profoundly, tragically blind. The first crack in our perfect picture was so small I almost missed it. It appeared about a year ago, at my dad and Carol's 5th anniversary dinner. It was a small gathering at a fancy Italian restaurant downtown, just the 4 of us and Brenda. The evening started out pleasantly enough. The wine was flowing, and we were all laughing and sharing stories about my dad's terrible attempts at gardening. But as the night wore on, I started to notice little things, like tiny hairline fractures in a porcelain vase. It was the way Arthur's eyes would find Brenda across the table. It wasn't a stare, nothing so obvious. It was a quick, almost imperceptible flick of his gaze, a constant monitoring of her presence. Then there was his laughter. It was just a little too loud, a little too enthusiastic, whenever Brenda told a story. He seemed hyper-aware of her, hanging on her every word. "Brenda, you have to tell Arthur and Jude about your big win in court last month," Carol said, her voice swelling with motherly pride. She completely wiped the floor with the opposition's high-priced lawyers. "She's going to be made partner at the firm next year for sure." "Oh, Mom, it's really not that big of a deal," Brenda said, waving a hand dismissively, but she was flushed with pleasure, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Not a big of a deal? It's amazing!" Arthur boomed, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet restaurant. "I always knew you'd do incredible things, Bren. You were always the smartest person in any room you walked into." The compliment, and the old nickname, Bren, felt like a small slap in the face. It was too personal, too familiar. It was a comment rooted in a shared history that I was not a part of. I took a slow sip of my wine, the rich red liquid suddenly tasting sour. I glanced at my dad, but he was just smiling, oblivious, happy to see his stepdaughter and son-in-law getting along. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. They had known each other for years. It was natural. It didn't mean anything. But the feeling lingered, a cold little knot of unease in the pit of my stomach. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, the feeling returned, stronger this time. I was already in bed, scrolling through a news app on my tablet. Arthur came out of the bathroom, and I pretended to be asleep, watching him through my eyelashes. He picked up his own tablet from the nightstand. I saw him hesitate for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. Then, he typed something into the search bar. I saw the familiar blue and white layout of Facebook appear. And I saw the name at the top of the page. Brenda's. He sat there on the edge of the bed, the room dark except for the pale blue light of the screen illuminating his face. And the expression on it, it was one I'd never seen before. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a strange, unsettling mixture of longing and deep, profound regret. He just sat there, for what felt like an eternity, slowly, methodically scrolling through her photos. Photos of her on vacation, photos with her friends, photos of her in her new life. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't just curiosity. This was something else. He must have sensed he was being watched, because he suddenly looked up, his eyes wide and startled, like a teenager caught doing something he shouldn't. He fumbled with the tablet, quickly closing the app. Couldn't sleep, he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. Thought I'd check the news headlines. He slid into bed, keeping a careful distance between us, and turned his back to me. I lay there in the dark for a long time, wide awake, the image of his face in the blue light burned into my mind. The first real seed of doubt had been planted. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that it was already starting to grow roots. Over the next few months, the distance between us grew. It wasn't a sudden chasm, but a slow, creeping erosion of the intimacy we once shared. It wasn't one big fight or a single dramatic event. It was a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts that, when added together, amounted to a tectonic change in the landscape of our marriage. Arthur started working late more often. At first, the excuses were plausible. A big project with a tight deadline. A new client that required extra attention. I was supportive, of course. I'd keep dinner warm for him, greet him with a hug when he finally dragged himself through the door, his face etched with exhaustion. But soon, working late became the new normal, happening 2, then 3, then 4 nights a week. When he was home, he was absent. A ghost at our dinner table. He'd be sitting right next to me on the sofa in the evening, the television flickering in the dark, but his mind was a million miles away. He'd stare into space, a thoughtful, distant expression on his face. "What are you thinking about?" I'd ask softly, trying to gently pull him back to me. He'd blink, as if being woken from a deep dream. "Oh," he'd say, forcing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Nothing important. Just work stuff. The usual." Our conversations, once the lifeblood of our relationship, became shallow and functional. We talked about the weather, about the leak in the upstairs bathroom, about which one of us needed to pick up milk on the way home. The easy, comfortable silence we once cherished, where we could sit together for hours without saying a word and still feel completely connected, now felt heavy, fraught with unspoken tensions and unanswered questions. His phone became a third party in our marriage. It used to be a tool, something he'd leave lying casually on the kitchen counter or the arm of the sofa. Now, it was an extension of his hand. It was always with him, in his pocket or placed screen down on the table beside him. I'd catch him smiling at something on the screen, a private little smile that wasn't for me. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd quickly lock the screen and put the phone away, his movements just a little too fast, a little too furtive. I'm not proud of what I did next, but the suspicion was eating me alive. It was a corrosive acid, dissolving the trust that had once been the bedrock of our relationship. One night, while he was in the shower, the sound of the water drumming against the tiles providing cover, I gave in. My hands were trembling as I picked up his phone from the nightstand. My heart pounded in my chest, I felt like a criminal in my own home. I guessed his password, our wedding anniversary, the irony of which was not lost on me, and my breath hitched when the screen unlocked. I scrolled through his messages, my stomach in knots. I was looking for a name. Brenda. But there was nothing. I checked his call log. Nothing. His emails. Nothing. In fact, his message history seemed almost pristine. Too clean. As if it had been carefully, deliberately wiped. The discovery brought me no relief. It was a void of evidence, which in its own way felt more damning than finding an incriminating text. It both relieved me and made me even more suspicious, which I know is completely irrational. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, my guilt mixing with a fresh wave of anxiety. I tried to fight it. I tried to bridge the gap that was widening between us. I planned date nights to our favorite restaurants, hoping to recapture some of the old magic. I'd cook his favorite meal, lasagna, and open a bottle of good red wine. And sometimes, for a brief, glorious moment, I'd get a glimpse of the old Arthur. He'd laugh at one of my jokes, a real, genuine laugh that reached his eyes. He'd reach for my hand across the table, his thumb stroking my knuckles in that familiar, comforting way. He'd pull me close on the sofa while we watched a movie. In those moments, I would allow myself to hope. I'd tell myself that this was just a phase, a rough patch that all married couples go through. But those moments never lasted. Like a sunbeam disappearing behind a cloud, he'd inevitably retreat back into the quiet, distant world inside his own head, leaving me feeling more alone, more lost, than ever before. The loneliness was the worst part. There is no loneliness more profound than lying in the dark next to the person you love, separated by an invisible, impenetrable wall of silence. I would lie awake for hours, listening to the sound of his steady breathing, and wonder, who is this man next to me? The man I had married, the man I thought I knew better than my own heart, was slowly but surely becoming a stranger. The moment I knew, truly knew, that I wasn't just being an insecure, paranoid wife came on a Tuesday. It was our anniversary. Not our wedding anniversary, a date we always celebrated with a fancy dinner out, but the anniversary of our very first date. It was a small, silly thing, but it was important to me. I'd always made a small fuss about it, usually by cooking a special dinner at home. This year, I'd planned to recreate the first meal I'd ever cooked for him, chicken piccata, with a side of roasted asparagus. I'd bought a beautiful bottle of Sauvignon Blanc to go with it. I was hoping a quiet, romantic evening at home might help us reconnect. Arthur called me at 4:30 that afternoon, just as I was starting to prep the ingredients. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice sounding oddly rushed and formal. "Listen, I'm so sorry to do this, but something's just come up at work. We just landed that big Sterling construction account, and my boss, Mr. Henderson, wants the whole team to stay late to hammer out the initial proposal. There's no getting out of it." "Oh," I said, my voice small. I looked at the fresh parsley and lemons sitting on my cutting board. "Okay. No problem. We can celebrate this weekend instead. You're the best." "Really," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. It's going to be a really late one. Don't wait up." And then he hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, just staring at the ingredients. A familiar, weary wave of disappointment washed over me. I carefully wrapped the chicken and put it back in the fridge, my movements slow and heavy. I decided to just order a pizza for myself and find an old movie to watch. Another night alone. Around 7 o'clock, my phone rang. I smiled when I saw the caller ID. It was my best friend, Diane. "Hey, you," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I'm not interrupting anniversary dinner, am I?" "Nope," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "You're interrupting a very hot date with a pepperoni pizza and a black and white movie." Arthur had to work late. A big new account just came in. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A beat of silence that lasted just a little too long. "Work late?" "That's weird," Diane said, her voice suddenly cautious. "What do you mean, weird?" I asked, a cold knot of dread instantly forming in my stomach. "Well," she began slowly, "I had to take my mom to a doctor's appointment this afternoon, way out in the suburbs. On my way home, I took that back road by Willow Lake to avoid the highway traffic. And I saw Arthur's car. My blood ran cold." "His car? By the lake? Are you sure?" "Positive," she said. "It's that dark green SUV with the dent in the bumper, right? It was parked outside that little independent coffee shop, the Daily Grind." I almost called out to him, but he looked like he was in the middle of a really intense conversation with someone, so I didn't want to interrupt. The Daily Grind. That coffee shop was a good 30-minute drive from his downtown office, in the complete opposite direction of our house. It was, however, only 10 minutes from the neighborhood where Brenda lived. My voice was barely a whisper. Who was he with, Diane?" I couldn't see her face clearly, Diane said, and I could hear the deep concern in her voice now. They were sitting at one of the outdoor tables. It was a woman with blonde hair. "Jude, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, my mind racing, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. Blonde hair. Near her neighborhood. On our anniversary. "Listen, Diane, I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow." After I hung up, I just stood there in the middle of my living room, the forgotten pizza growing cold on the coffee table. My hands were shaking. I needed to know for sure. I needed to hear the lie from the source. With a sense of grim determination, I looked up the number for his office. A polite young receptionist answered on the second ring. "Good evening, Henderson and Sterling Associates," she chirped. "Hi, could I possibly speak to Arthur Miller, please?" I asked, my voice strained and tight. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, "but Mr. Miller left for the day at around 4 o'clock this afternoon. Can I take a message?" 4 o'clock. He had called me at 4:30, 30 minutes after he'd already left the office, to spin a detailed, elaborate lie about staying late to work on a new account. The lie was so blatant, so careless. He hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks properly. The cold knot in my stomach tightened into a hard, painful stone. He wasn't at work. He was with her. On our anniversary. The betrayal was so sharp, so absolute, it literally took my breath away. I mumbled a no, thank you, and hung up the phone. I sank onto the sofa, the truth of the situation washing over me in sickening, relentless waves. He was a liar. And I was a fool. I must have sat there in the dark for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, completely still, a storm of fury and grief raging inside me. I meticulously planned the confrontation in my head. I rehearsed the words I would say, the calm, collected, ice-cold tone I would use. I wasn't going to scream or yell. I was going to present him with the facts, Diane's call, the receptionist's confirmation, and I was going to watch him squirm. I was going to demand the truth. I was going to fight for my marriage, for the life we had built. At least, that's what I thought I was going to do. But I never got the chance. Because just as I was steeling myself for the sound of his key in the lock, my phone rang again, shattering the heavy silence. I glanced at the caller ID, my heart lurching in my chest. It was my stepmother, Carol. Her name was flashing on the screen, urgent and insistent. A sudden, chilling premonition washed over me, a cold dread that had nothing to do with my own marital problems. Something was terribly wrong. I swiped to answer, my hand trembling. Carol? Judith. Her voice was a frantic, high-pitched sob, stretched thin with panic. Oh, God, Judith, it's Brenda. What is it? What's happened? I asked, my own problems instantly forgotten as I shot to my feet. There's been an accident, she wailed, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of hysteria. A car accident. She was driving home from a coffee shop, and a truck ran a red light. It hit her side of the car. It's bad, Jude. It's really, really bad. They've taken her to Memorial Hospital. My mind went completely blank. An accident. Brenda. Memorial Hospital. The words just ricocheted around in my skull, refusing to form a coherent thought. My own white-hot anger, my own deep-seated betrayal, felt so petty and insignificant in the face of this. I'm on my way, I said automatically, already grabbing my keys and my purse. My first instinct, even then, was to call Arthur. He was her family, too, in our strange, tangled way. He needed to know. I dialed his number, my fingers feeling clumsy and numb. He picked up on the first ring. Jude? Is everything okay? He asked. His voice sounded normal. Too normal. As if he hadn't just spent the evening lying to my face. As if he wasn't, at that very moment, probably composing his next lie for when he got home. I didn't have the time or the energy for accusations. It's Brenda, I said, my voice flat and cold. She's been in a car accident. A bad one. They've taken her to Memorial. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. And then I heard it. A sharp, ragged intake of breath, followed by a sound that was half gasp, half strangled sob. No, he whispered, his voice cracking. Oh, God, no. No, no, no. The anguish in his voice was raw, visceral, terrifying in its intensity. This was more than just concern for a stepsister. This was something deeper, something primal. This was the sound of a man whose entire world had just tilted on its axis. I have to go, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. I have to be there. Jude, can you come get me? I'm still at the daily grind. Please. I'll explain everything later, I swear. Just please, come and get me. I should have said no. 1,000 times, no. I should have told him to call a taxi. I should have told him to call his lover's mother. I should have hung up the phone and let him deal with the catastrophic mess he had single-handedly created. But I didn't. In that moment of pure crisis, 5 years of love and partnership and shared history took over. It was an automatic, unthinking response. My husband was in distress. I went. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice hollow. And I walked out the door, leaving my own broken heart behind on the sofa. The drive to the coffee shop was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The rain had started to fall a little harder, and the slick, dark roads reflected the streetlights in a blurry, disorienting way. My mind was a chaotic storm of conflicting emotions, a genuine, sickening fear for Brenda's life, a white-hot, righteous anger at Arthur, and a profound, bone-deep sadness for the marriage I now realized was a complete and utter sham. When I pulled up to the curb outside the Daily Grind, he was already waiting, pacing back and forth on the wet sidewalk under the dim glow of a streetlight. He looked frantic, his hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his face pale and drawn. He didn't even wait for me to stop completely before he yanked open the passenger door and threw himself into the seat. The car filled with the smell of damp wool, coffee, and deceit. "Go," he said, his voice tight. "Just go." We drove toward the hospital in a tense, suffocating silence. The only sound in the car was the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the windshield wipers against the ever-increasing rain. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I could feel him staring at me, could feel the weight of his guilt and his panic, but I refused to look at him. I couldn't. If I looked at him, I didn't know what I would do. As we neared the hospital, the enormous, brightly lit red and white sign for the emergency room looming ahead of us, I knew I couldn't take the silence anymore. I couldn't just walk into that hospital with him, pretending to be the supportive wife, without knowing the truth. I needed to hear it from his lips. I pulled the car over to the curb in the patient drop-off lane, right under the big awning, and put the gearshift into park. The engine idled quietly. I turned to face him, my voice dangerously quiet, all the rage and hurt distilled into a single, focused point. "Arthur," I said, the name feeling foreign and bitter in my mouth. "Before we go in there, you are going to tell me what is going on." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared out the windshield at the bustling entrance of the ER, his hands twisting together in his lap. "Not now, Jude. Please. This isn't the time." "Yes, now," I insisted, my voice gaining a hard, unyielding edge. "This is the perfect time. I deserve to know why you lied to me. I deserve to know why you were with her tonight, of all nights. And I deserve to know why you are falling apart like this." I took a shaky breath, the next words tearing at my throat as I said them. "This is more than just concern for a stepsister, isn't it? This is more than just catching up. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were full of a desperate, pleading anguish I had never seen before. They were red-rimmed and swimming with tears. He looked completely and utterly broken. And then he said the words. The 4 simple words that would echo in my head for months to come. The 4 words that acted as a final, fatal blow to the heart of my marriage. "Please, Jude," he choked out, the words tumbling out in a messy rush of tears and panic, all pretense gone. "I need to be there. I still love her." The world stopped. It was like a switch had been flipped inside my brain, and all the noise, all the emotion, all the chaotic thoughts just went silent. There was nothing left but those 4 words, hanging in the sterile, rain-washed air of the car. I still love her. He hadn't said, "I love you, too." He hadn't said, "I think I have feelings for her." He said still. As in, a continuous, unbroken line from the past straight through to the present. As in, he had never stopped. My entire 5-year marriage, our entire life together, flashed before my eyes in a series of cruel, mocking snapshots. Our wedding day. Our laughter. The quiet, comfortable moments we had shared. Was it all a lie? Was I just a placeholder, a convenient, comfortable second choice while he secretly pined for the great love of his life? He seemed to realize the magnitude of what he just admitted, the color draining from his face as he saw the look in my eyes. Jude, I didn't mean it like that. He stammered, his voice trailing off. But I held up a hand to stop him. I couldn't hear any more lies. Not now. I felt strangely calm, a terrifying, icy calm that settled deep in my bones, freezing the hurricane of emotion inside me. I put the car back in drive. Go to her, Arthur, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any and all emotion. It sounded like a stranger's voice. She needs you. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, as if he wanted to say something more. But the pull of the hospital, the pull of her, was stronger than any words he might have had for me. He fumbled with the door handle, then scrambled out of the car, slamming the door behind him. I didn't drive away immediately. I just sat there, watching him in my rearview mirror. He ran. He didn't walk, he didn't jog. He sprinted toward those automatic sliding glass doors as if his own life depended on reaching her side. He never once looked back. I sat in that drop-off lane for a long time after he disappeared inside, just staring at the reflection of the sterile, unforgiving hospital lights on my rain-streaked windshield. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the world outside. But I wasn't crying. I felt empty. Hollowed out. In that moment, watching him run away from me and toward her, I knew, with a chilling and absolute certainty, that my marriage was over. He had made his choice, clear as day. Now, it was time for me to make mine. I don't remember much about the drive home from the hospital. The familiar 10-mile route is a complete blur in my memory, a montage of blurry red taillights and slick, wet roads. My body was on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my foot pressing the pedals, but my mind was a million miles away. It was stuck in a torturous loop, replaying that one devastating sentence over and over and over again. I still love her. It was a poison, seeping into every happy memory I had of us, tainting everything. Our wedding day, our laughter, the quiet, contented moments we shared, was any of it real? Had he been thinking of her the whole time? When I finally walked back into our house, the silence was what hit me first. It was a deafening, cavernous silence. It was no longer the comfortable silence of a shared life, but the empty, echoing silence of a home that had just been irrevocably broken. The pizza I had ordered for my lonely anniversary dinner was still sitting on the coffee table, cold and congealed in its box. I looked at it, and a bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Just a few hours ago, my biggest problem was that my husband had lied about a business meeting. Now, that seemed like a quaint, trivial issue from another lifetime. I walked through the house like a ghost in my own life, my hand trailing along the walls. I looked at the things we had chosen together. A beautiful landscape painting above the fireplace. The big, comfortable armchair that was his designated spot. The handmade quilt on our bed that we had bought at a small-town craft fair on a weekend getaway. These objects, once so familiar and imbued with the warmth of our shared life, now felt like artifacts in a museum dedicated to a stranger's failed marriage. The betrayal wasn't just about Arthur. It was about my family. My own father, in his quest for late-life happiness, had inadvertently brought this wrecking ball into my life. He had married her mother, binding our families together in a way that now felt like a cruel, cosmic joke. I felt a surge of hot, directionless anger, at Arthur for his deceit, at Brenda for her part in it, at my dad and Carol for their obliviousness, and at myself for being so willfully blind. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated rage, a switch flipped inside me. The shock, the numbness, the grief, it all receded, replaced by a cold, hard, diamond-like clarity. I was not going to be the weeping, heartbroken victim in this sordid drama. I was not going to wait around for him to come home from the hospital, full of tearful apologies and flimsy excuses. I was done. Finished. I walked with purpose into our bedroom and pulled my largest suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. The movements were methodical, robotic, detached. I opened drawers, taking out stacks of my clothes. I folded each item neatly, clinically, as if I were packing for a business trip and not dismantling my entire life. T-shirts, sweaters, jeans. I went into the bathroom and swept my toiletries, my face cream, my toothbrush, my shampoo, into a canvas bag. I was taking my life back, one small, practical, mundane item at a time. I didn't take everything. I couldn't bear to. I left behind the furniture we had chosen together, the art we had hung on the walls, the dozens of books that lined our shelves, filled with our shared notes in the margins. They were part of a life that no longer existed. I packed only what was fundamentally mine, what was essential. As I worked, my mind was blessedly quiet. There were no tears, no raging thoughts. There was only a singular, driving purpose: to get out. Before I zipped the suitcase, I went back into the bedroom. I took a piece of plain white paper and a pen from the drawer of the nightstand. My hand was perfectly steady as I wrote 4 simple, brutal words. Now she can have you. I folded the note once and placed it squarely in the middle of his pillow, right where his lying head would have been. I took one last, sweeping look around the house that had been my home, the place where I had felt so safe and so deeply loved. Now, it just felt like a stage set for a play that had reached its tragic, inevitable conclusion. I picked up my suitcase, which suddenly felt both incredibly heavy and wonderfully light. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I just closed it, and with the soft click of the lock, I closed the door on my marriage forever. I got in my car and drove, my destination the only safe harbor I could think of. I called my old friend Walter. He was a kind, quiet architect who had been my friend since long before I'd met Arthur. Walter, I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady, even to my own ears. I know it's late, and I'm so sorry to ask, but can I come over? I need a place to stay for a little while. He didn't ask a single question. That's the kind of friend he is. Of course, Jude, he said simply, his voice warm and calm. The guest room is always ready for you. The door's unlocked. Drive safe. As I turned onto his quiet, tree-lined street, I finally reached for my phone and held my thumb over the power button. I took one last look at the dark screen, then pressed down until it went black. I couldn't face the inevitable barrage of calls and texts that I knew would be coming. I didn't want to hear his excuses or his half-hearted apologies. I needed silence. I needed to breathe. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. It was a terrifying feeling, but it was also profoundly, breathtakingly liberating. The life I had known was over. A new, uncertain one was just beginning. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting with the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and that you're here with me on this journey. Your support means more to me than you know. It truly does. So please, comment with the number 1 and let me tell you what happened next. For 3 days, I lived in a self-imposed exile, a bubble of silence. I kept my phone off, tucked away in the bottom of my purse like a dormant threat. Walter's guest room was small and simple, with a window that looked out onto his quiet, peaceful backyard. It was my sanctuary. Walter was the perfect host for a woman whose world had just been shattered. He was a quiet, gentle presence. He'd make a pot of coffee in the morning and leave a mug for me on the counter. He'd make an extra sandwich at lunch and leave it on a plate in the fridge. And then he would just let me be. He knew I didn't want to talk, didn't want to be peppered with questions or offered well-meaning but useless advice. He gave me the priceless gift of space. I spent most of my time sitting on his back patio, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the squirrels chase each other up the old oak tree. I felt numb. The initial volcanic eruption of pain and anger had subsided, leaving a hollow, echoing ache in its place. It felt like a part of my body had been amputated without anesthesia, and I was just beginning to learn how to live with the raw, gaping wound and the phantom limb that would ache for a life that was no longer there. On the fourth morning, I woke up knowing I couldn't hide from the world forever. The numbness was beginning to recede, and the practical realities of my situation were starting to seep in. I needed to face the fallout. With a deep, fortifying breath, I retrieved my phone from my purse, plugged it in, and turned it on. It was like opening a floodgate. The device buzzed and pinged relentlessly for what felt like a full minute, the screen lighting up with a dizzying cascade of notifications. 47 missed calls from Arthur. 93 text messages. A handful of missed calls from my dad and Carol. I started with the texts from Arthur, my heart a dull, heavy stone in my chest. Reading them in chronological order was like watching a man's psyche unravel in real time. The first few, from the night I left, were laced with confusion and a hint of angry entitlement. Where are you? I came home and you're gone. Jude, this isn't funny. Your stuff is gone. Pick up the damn phone. What the hell is this note supposed to mean? Call me. Now. Then, as the hours had passed and I hadn't responded, the tone had shifted to frantic, panicked worry. Okay, I'm getting worried. Please, just text me and tell me you're safe. I'm calling everyone. Your dad is worried sick. He said you're not answering his calls either. Just answer me. Jude, whatever you're thinking, it's not what it looks like. We need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. And finally, in the last day or so, the messages had become desperate, pleading, pathetic. I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid, unforgivable mistake. I know that. I wasn't thinking. I was in shock about Brenda. I was terrified she was going to die. The words just came out. They didn't mean anything. I love you, Jude. You're my wife. You're my life. It's always been you. Please come home. The house is so empty without you. I can't do this without you. I'm nothing without you. I read them all, one after another, and felt nothing. The words were meaningless, hollow echoes in the vast emptiness he had created. They were the words of a man who had been caught, not a man who was truly sorry for his actions. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry his comfortable, convenient life had been disrupted. But was he sorry for the months of lies? For the secret meetings? For the deep and profound betrayal? I didn't think so. There was one new voicemail, left just an hour ago. I almost deleted it without listening, but some morbid curiosity, some need to hear the sound of his desperation, made me press play. His voice filled the quiet room, and it was a voice I barely recognized. It was thick and hoarse with tears, ragged with sleeplessness. Jude, honey, please. If you get this, please call me. What I said in the car. I was out of my mind. I was scared for her, that's all. I was thinking about her as a friend, as family. I don't love her. Not like that. I love you. Only you. Please, just come home so we can talk this through. We can fix this. I know we can. I'm so sorry. Too little, too late. The truth, the real, ugly, unvarnished truth, had come out in a moment of unguarded, panicked honesty. No amount of desperate backtracking could put that genie back in the bottle. I deleted the voicemail, and then, with a strange sense of finality, I blocked his number. Later that day, there was a knock on Walter's door. I opened it to find Diane, my best friend, standing on the doorstep. She was holding a large Tupperware container of her famous chicken soup, and her face was a mask of worry and love. I had to pry your location out of Walter's cold, dead hands, she said, pulling me into a fierce, tight hug that I gratefully returned. He's a good man. Loyal. Are you okay? No, I said, the first time I'd admitted it out loud to anyone. The word came out on a shaky breath. But I think I will be. We sat at Walter's small kitchen table for hours, the comforting aroma of the soup filling the air. I told her everything. Every last sordid detail, from the anniversary dinner to the phone call from Carol, to the devastating confession in the car. She listened patiently, her expression growing darker and angrier with every word I spoke. When I finished, she just shook her head, her eyes flashing with a protective fury on my behalf. That absolute fool, she muttered. That selfish, cowardly fool. Then she hesitated, twisting a napkin in her hands. Jude, there's something I have to tell you. And I feel like the worst friend in the world for not saying something sooner. What is it? I asked, my stomach clenching in anticipation of another blow. I didn't just see Arthur at the coffee shop that one time, she confessed, refusing to meet my eyes. I saw him with her a few weeks before that, too. They were at that little park across town, the one with the duck pond. They were sitting on a bench, talking. They looked intense. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was innocent, that they were just step-siblings catching up. I didn't want to be the one to plant a seed of doubt, to upset you over what might be nothing. A park. A coffee shop. So this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. They had been meeting in secret. And there's more, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. My sister, you know she works in real estate? Her office is in the same building as Brenda's law firm. She has a colleague, a woman named Sarah, who is friends with Brenda. According to Sarah, Arthur and Brenda reconnected at your dad's anniversary dinner. He sent her a message on social media afterward, just catching up. But it quickly turned into something more. They were texting every day. He was confiding in her about his stress at work, about you too. He told Brenda he was feeling lost and disconnected in your marriage. I felt a fresh wave of bitter nausea rise in my throat. He was feeling lost? He was feeling disconnected? I was the one who was lost, trying desperately to connect with a husband who was emotionally checking out and building a secret, intimate life with my own stepsister behind my back. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. So it wasn't just a moment of panic, I said, the final, ugly pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. It was a full-blown emotional affair. 4 months. I'm so sorry, Jude, Diane said, her own eyes filling with tears. I feel like I should have told you what I saw at the park. I've been sick about it. No, I said, reaching across the table and squeezing her hand tightly. You're a good friend. You were trying to protect me. But I'm glad I know the whole truth now. Knowing the full extent of his deception didn't make the initial wound hurt any less, but it did something else. It cauterized it. It burned away any lingering shred of doubt I might have had about my decision to leave. This wasn't a simple crack that could be repaired with therapy and apologies. The entire foundation of my marriage had been rotten from the start, eaten away by a secret he had been harboring all along. And it was time to tear the whole damn thing down. The very next morning, I looked up the number for the most ruthless, highly recommended divorce lawyer in the city. And I made an appointment. A week later, I agreed to meet Arthur one last time. Not to reconcile, not to hear more apologies, but to tell him face to face that I had filed for divorce and that any further communication would have to go through our lawyers. We met at a sterile, anonymous chain coffee shop in a strip mall, a place with no memories for either of us. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the corner. He looked terrible. In just over a week, he seemed to have aged 10 years. He'd lost weight, his face was gaunt, and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. He looked up when I approached, his expression a miserable mix of hope and despair. For a fleeting, treacherous moment, I felt a pang of the old affection, the old instinct to comfort him. But I pushed it away, crushing it under the weight of his betrayal. This was the man who had shattered my world. He deserved no comfort from me. "Jude, thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice raspy as I sat down opposite him. "I'm not here to talk about us, Arthur," I said, my voice firm and even, betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. I placed my purse on the empty chair beside me, creating a small barrier. "I'm here to tell you that I've spoken with a lawyer. The divorce papers will be served to you by the end of the week." His face crumpled, the flicker of hope in his eyes dying instantly. "No. Jude, please, don't do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I know we can. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job, we can move, whatever it takes." "Work through what, exactly?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Should we work through the fact that you've been carrying on an emotional affair with my stepsister for months? Should we work through the fact that you lied to my face, repeatedly, without a hint of remorse? Or should we start with the part where you sat in my car and told me, with tears in your eyes, that you still love her?" He flinched with every question, as if I were physically striking him. "It wasn't an affair. Not a real one. Nothing physical happened. We just talked." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You met in secret. You lied about your whereabouts. You shared intimate details about our marriage, our private life, with another woman. A woman who happens to be my stepsister. If you need a dictionary, Arthur, I can assure you that is the very definition of an emotional affair. The lack of physical intimacy doesn't make it any less of a betrayal. In some ways, it makes it worse." I was confused, he pleaded, leaning forward, his hands outstretched on the table as if to reach for mine. I instinctively pulled my own hands back into my lap. The nostalgia, seeing her again as family, it just got the better of me. It was a mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment. "But it's you I love, Jude. I was a fool, I know that. But don't throw away 5 years of marriage, 5 years of a good life, because of my stupidity." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt nothing but a cold, sad finality. The man I loved was gone. Or perhaps, more accurately, the man I thought I loved had never really existed in the first place. "This isn't just about your stupidity, Arthur," I said, my voice softening slightly, not with pity, but with the quiet certainty of closure. "This is about trust. The very foundation of a marriage. And you have systematically, deliberately, and completely destroyed it. The problem isn't that you fell out of love with me. The problem is that in your moment of crisis, when your past came crashing into your present, your first and only thought was of her, not of me, not of us. When you ran into that hospital, you weren't just running to her side. You were running away from our marriage. And that is something I can never, ever forget or forgive." I stood up from the table, my movements calm and deliberate. "Our prenuptial agreement is quite clear regarding our assets," I said, my voice all business now. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours to sort out the final details of selling the house. Goodbye, Arthur." I turned and walked out of that coffee shop without looking back, leaving him sitting there alone amidst the clatter of coffee cups and the ruins of the life he had so carelessly destroyed. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. The enormous, crushing weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for months had finally been lifted. The months that followed were a messy, exhausting blur of legal paperwork and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a life from scratch. The divorce was messy, not because of any financial disputes. Thankfully, my insistence on a prenuptial agreement years ago proved to be one of the wisest decisions of my life, but because Arthur fought it every single step of the way. He refused to sign the papers, forcing us into mediation. He used those sessions not to negotiate the terms of our separation, but to make long, tearful speeches about his regret and his undying love for me, begging me for another chance in front of a stone-faced mediator. It was emotionally draining and profoundly frustrating, but my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Catherine, was a shark. She kept the process moving forward, shielding me from the worst of his theatrics. While the legal battle raged on, I focused on the practicalities. I found a small, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, a sunny little place with a balcony just big enough for a chair and a few potted plants. The first few weeks were hard. The silence of the apartment was overwhelming at times. I had to learn how to be alone again. I struggled to assemble a bookcase from IKEA, nearly breaking down in tears of frustration, but when I finally slid the last shelf into place, a fierce, unexpected wave of pride washed over me. I had done it myself. I started painting again, a hobby I had loved in my younger years but had let slide. I filled my new, empty walls with my own colorful, abstract canvases. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a new life for myself, a life that was entirely, unapologetically mine. I heard sporadic updates about Brenda through the family grapevine, which I tried my best to ignore. She had made a full and complete recovery, thankfully. According to my stepmother Carol, in a tearful, apologetic phone call, once Brenda was out of the hospital, Arthur had made some sort of grand, romantic gesture. He'd shown up at her apartment with flowers, apparently convinced that with me out of the picture, they could finally pick up where they had left off 2 decades ago. And, in the ultimate, most delicious irony, she had turned him down flat. She told him, and apparently anyone else who would listen, that she had been caught up in a foolish fantasy, a nostalgic dream of what could have been. She said the accident had been a terrifying wake-up call, making her realize she was romanticizing a past that was long gone and best left there. She told him she had no interest in starting a real relationship built on the ashes of my destroyed marriage. So there he was. He had blown up his entire life for a ghost, and the ghost didn't even want him. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a small, dark flicker of satisfaction at that news. He had risked everything for a fantasy, and in the end, he was left with absolutely nothing. My father and I eventually had a long, difficult conversation. He was heartbroken and deeply ashamed over the whole situation. He apologized profusely for what his new family's past had done to my present. I told him, honestly, that I didn't blame him. He couldn't have known. But our relationship is still strained. It's hard to look at him sometimes and not be reminded of the chaos his choices inadvertently brought into my life. About 6 months after I first walked out that door, the divorce was finalized. The day I signed the last piece of paper, I didn't celebrate. There was no triumphant uncorking of champagne. I just went home to my quiet, sunny apartment, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat out on my little balcony. I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a genuine, profound sense of peace. The story doesn't end there, though. The best part of my revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet. It was the life I built afterward. I reconnected with old friends like Diane, who had been my rock through it all. I started traveling, taking small weekend trips to coastal towns and mountain villages I'd always wanted to see. And, on the advice of my therapist, who said I needed something to love that would love me back unconditionally, I did something just for me. I went to the local animal shelter. That's where I found Walter. Not my friend Walter, but a scruffy little terrier mix with one floppy ear and the most soulful brown eyes I had ever seen. He was huddled in the back of his cage, shaking with fear. I sat with him for an hour, just talking to him softly, until he finally crept forward and licked my hand. I adopted him that day. He's my constant companion now, my furry little shadow who greets me with frantic, happy wiggles and full-body tail wags every single time I walk through the door. He doesn't care about my past or my broken heart. He just loves that I'm the person who gives him belly rubs and throws his favorite squeaky ball. Last week, I ran into an old neighbor from my former life in the grocery store. After some awkward small talk, she told me she'd seen Arthur recently. She said he looks lost. He sold our old house because he said he couldn't stand the memories. He's living in a soulless, generic bachelor apartment downtown, and he mostly keeps to himself. He got what he thought he wanted, a life without me, and it turns out to be a very lonely, very empty place. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity for him, but it passed as quickly as it came. We all make our choices, and we all have to live with the consequences. He chose his romanticized past over our real, tangible future. I chose myself. And I can tell you, without a single shadow of a doubt, that I made the better choice. My life isn't perfect. I still have days where a sad memory will catch me off guard. But my life is mine. It's real. And it is peaceful. And after the storm I've been through, I've learned that peace is the most precious, most valuable thing in the entire world. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've ever been through something similar, or if any part of this resonated with you, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. It truly helps to know that we're not alone in these struggles. And if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It means the world to me.